Hello and welcome to a humble Highland home. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Now that the essential seasonal jobs are complete in the kitchen garden, I'm planning ahead for the year to come, using the natural resources that I have to hand. I like to make the most of opportune moments when I'm out and about. I generally have a couple of old compost bags in the car, just in case I come across some lovely natural resources that I can gather and take home. At this time of year, we are surrounded by an abundance of fallen leaves. I primarily just take the leaves off the pathways and I leave the rest as they provide shelter and food to our wildlife. Today I'm collecting leaves whilst out on a local walk, but there are many other public places where people are only too happy for you to bag up the leaves, as it can save them a job. But remember to ask permission where necessary first. I also had a spur of the moment trip to the beach. I didn't time the tide very well, but I still managed to harvest some seaweed. Some areas do have restrictions on collecting seaweed from the beach, so always check first and forage responsibly. I only ever take a few pieces of unattached seaweed at a time. If it's still attached, then I leave it be. Seaweed contains many nutrients, including nitrogen, potassium, phosphate, magnesium, zinc and iron. All of these will add a perfect blend into the kitchen garden. It's just a short visit for me at the beach today, as the weather is very changeable and it's pretty chilly. But before I go, I was treated to this spectacular view of the rainbow. My next natural resource that I'm collecting involves a wheelbarrow and a shovel. Unfortunately, the kitty cats can't help me with this one, so they need to go inside, if not they will follow me. We are very fortunate that this year I have permission to take some horse manure from one of our neighbours' fields. It's a win-win, as I clear the field for them, but I gain this garden gold. Manure has got so many benefits for the garden, especially the kitchen garden. Some of this will go into the compost as part of the layering system, but most of this will be stored ready to go into a mulch mix for this time next year. This is definitely one way of keeping warm on a cold autumn day. This is where I store my manure. I've previously emptied last year's, so that's in some old compost bags, and that'll be used in the near future. And this fresh manure will go and sit in here for the next 12 months. But as I shovel it in, I take out any perennial weeds, especially couch grass or creeping buttercup, as I've got enough of that already. I don't need any more. I've got a few more trips to do before I fill this container up, but as it gets more frosty, the easier it is to pick up. As well as foraging for fallen leaves, I also take them from our own pathways. Leaves on the pathways can actually be a slip hazard for us, so I'm keen to keep them clear. And I obviously have a good use for these leaves. I use this second green cone here to store the fallen leaves. I've also made a chicken wire container in the past to store leaves, and eventually, if left long enough, the leaves will turn into leaf mould, which is another valuable resource for the garden. But to speed up the decomposition process, I'm putting the leaves through the wood and mulch chipper to help the process along. I will use some of this mulch down leaf mould in the compost over the year, and also any that's left will go into the mulch in 12 months' time. The next natural resource that I'm currently gathering is woodchip. Now I use most of our stored woodchip to replace the pathway in front of the greenhouse and composting area. But throughout the year I gather fallen branches and prunings ready for when I've got the chipper out and I need to refill the stocks. I like to store our wood chip for a period of time so it starts the decomposition process, and it will avoid any nitrogen being robbed from any of the plants once it does go into the garden. Once it's ready, I like to add a layer to the garden paths, and I also like to use some in the garden mulch for the perennial garden to see it over the winter time. Working with nature like this, everything comes full circle. The seaweed can be added directly to the garden beds for overwinter, but I was hoping to put it through the wood chipper to break it down to add it to the compost. However, the weather is against me and the wood chipper is electric, so I'm going to pop this away and this will have to wait for another day. And the last of my natural resources that I'm working on just now is our compost bay. Now this is something that I work on continuously throughout the year. I like to try and add something every day to build up that beautiful compost, to add it back to the garden. I like to keep the heat in the compost bays as much as possible to help with the decomposition, so I'm working quite quickly to turn this compost just now. The way I use this 3-bay system is that I use the first bay to add the browns and greens in a lasagna layering system, and then I turn it into the middle bay and then turn it into the last bay, and by that time it is compost ready to go back to the garden. The compost decomposition will slow down over winter time, but then in spring, as it starts to heat up again, it will speed up, and I want lots of yummy stuff in there ready for it to be made into compost. So I'm turning it just now so that the first bay is then empty and ready for me to refill over winter time, ready for that springtime warmth. And add in a couple of plastic bags on top or some cardboard will just keep the heat in. As I expand the garden and food growing spaces, I know that I will need more organic matter to build and protect the soil. So I have this in mind as I gather and store these 5 valuable resources. For now, thank you so much for joining me here today. Take care of yourself and others, and I'll see you in the next video.